The widow who lost everything, until a quiet cowboy showed her love could heal again. The sun hung low over the quiet town of Red Rock, casting a golden light on the dusty streets and barren fields. Clara stood by the window of her small farmhouse, staring out at the empty land that stretched before her. It had been nearly a year since the tragic raid that took everything from her, her husband, her children, and the life they had built together. Now all she had left were memories in an empty house. The wind howled through the trees, and Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it did little to chase away the cold that settled in her bones. She had tried to rebuild, to find a way to keep the farm going, but it felt pointless. The crops had failed, the animals were few, and the townspeople no longer stopped by to offer help or comfort. They didn't know how to look at her anymore, as if her grief had become something contagious. Clara's heart was heavy with the weight of her loss. She had loved her family more than anything in this world, and now she felt as though she were living in a dream, surrounded by the echoes of their laughter and the warmth of their love. It all seemed so far away now. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. Clara turned toward the sound, but for a moment she didn't move. She wasn't used to visitors anymore. Not after everything that had happened. "Clara?" a voice called softly from outside. She sighed and opened the door. It was Mrs. Harper, the neighbor from down the road. Her face was kind, but there was a sadness in her eyes. Clara had seen that look before. It was the look people gave her when they didn't know what to say, when they didn't know how to help. "I brought you some fresh bread," Mrs. Harper said, holding out a warm loaf wrapped in a cloth. "Thought you might like it." Clara nodded and took the bread, though she wasn't sure how much good it would do. "Thank you, Mrs. Harper," she said softly, "but I've got plenty of food." "I know, dear. Just thought you might appreciate something homemade." She paused, glancing over her shoulder. "You know, the townsfolk are worried about you, Clara. You've been so quiet. You can't keep all this to yourself forever." She didn't want to hear it. She didn't want anyone's pity. "I'm fine," she said, her voice a little too sharp. Mrs. Harper didn't argue. She simply nodded and turned to leave. But before she walked away, she paused and looked back. "If you ever need anything, Clara, don't hesitate to ask. You're not alone in this." Clara closed the door with a soft click, staring at the bread in her hands. She didn't want to be alone, but she didn't know how to open herself up again. Every time she had tried to connect with someone, the pain had come rushing back. The emptiness was so deep it seemed like it would swallow her whole. She set the bread on the table and walked over to the window again. Outside, the world seemed unchanged. The stars were starting to appear in the sky, twinkling like distant dreams. But Clara couldn't reach them. They were too far to heal her broken heart. A rustling sound caught her attention, and she turned to look. Out on the edge of the field, a lone figure was walking toward her house. She couldn't make out the person's face, but something about the way they moved made Clara pause. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, and he walked with a steady, purposeful stride. Clara frowned. She didn't recognize him. Most of the men in town had stayed away from her since the raid. They didn't want to face the pain that had followed. But this man, he didn't seem to care about the rumors or the whispers. He just kept walking toward her house as if he had every right to be there. The man came closer, and Clara could see his weathered face now. His eyes were dark, deep-set, and seemed to hold a quiet sadness of their own. His hair was dark, and there was a roughness to his features, as though he had lived a life that had demanded everything from him. Clara stepped back from the window, uncertain of what to do. She didn't know this man, but something about him felt different from the others. There was no pity in his gaze, no judgment. Just silence. The knock on the door came again, this time louder, more urgent. "Clara?" the voice called again. She took a breath and opened the door slowly. The man stood there, his hat in his hands, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am," he said in a deep, steady voice. "I'm Eli. I'm just passing through, and I noticed your farm's in need of some help. I've got a few skills with fixing fences and repairing barns. Thought I could offer my services if you're in need." Clara hesitated. She didn't need help. She didn't want help, but there was something about this man, Eli, that made her pause. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't offering pity. He was simply offering his hands, his skills, his time. "I thank you, but I'm fine," Clara said, her voice wavering. "I don't need anything." Eli nodded, as if he understood more than she said. "All right, ma'am. I'll be around if you change your mind." He tipped his hat and turned to leave. But Clara stood there staring after him. There was something in the way he carried himself, something gentle yet strong.
He had no agenda.
No expectations. He was just a man, walking through a lonely world, offering what he could. Clara closed the door softly, the weight of the bread still in her hands. She didn't know why Eli's visit had stirred something in her, but she couldn't deny the feeling that for the first time in a long while, she wasn't as alone as she thought. The night grew darker, but Clara's heart felt a little lighter, as if a small, fragile spark of hope had been lit in the depths of her soul. This part sets up Clara's grief. Intro the morning sun rose slowly over Red Rock, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. Clara had been awake for hours, unable to sleep. The cold had crept into her bones again, and the weight of grief had settled back into her heart. She hadn't felt this lost in a long time, but it was a familiar feeling, the kind of loneliness that sat in the pit of your stomach and never quite left. She glanced at the bread Mrs. Harper had brought the night before, still sitting untouched on the table. Clara didn't have much appetite anymore. The days felt endless, one blending into the next, with nothing to break the monotony. She had tried to fill the empty hours with work, but the land seemed to fight her at every turn. The weeds grew faster than she could pull them, the animals were restless, and the crops refused to grow. The sound of hooves approaching caught Clara's attention. She froze, her heart beating a little faster. She had become so accustomed to the silence of her farm that the sound of anyone coming near was enough to make her pause. The quiet cowboy Eli had promised to return, but Clara hadn't expected it to be so soon. She wasn't sure if she was ready for another encounter. But as the sound of hooves grew louder, Clara found herself walking toward the door. She opened it slowly, the hinges creaking in the stillness. And there, standing in the doorway, was Eli. He was exactly as she remembered him. Quiet, reserved, and with a look in his eyes that was both kind and sorrowful. His dark hair fell in loose waves around his face, and the dust of the road clung to his worn clothes. "Good morning, ma'am," Eli said, tipping his hat. Clara stepped back, unsure of what to say. "Morning," she replied, her voice soft. Eli didn't seem in a hurry to speak. Instead, he stood there for a moment just watching her, his gaze steady but gentle. Clara felt a strange warmth in his presence, as if the world outside her farm had momentarily stopped moving. "I came by to see if you needed help with anything," Eli said, his voice low and steady. "I've got a little time this morning, and I thought I could lend a hand." Clara hesitated. She didn't want to accept help, didn't want to seem weak. But she couldn't deny that the offer was tempting. Maybe a little help wouldn't hurt. "I suppose there's always something that needs fixing around here," Clara said, glancing out at the overgrown garden. "But I don't want to trouble you." Eli smiled, a small, quiet thing, but it was enough to make Clara feel as though she wasn't being burdened. "It's no trouble at all, ma'am. Just thought I could give you a hand with what I can." Clara stood there for a moment, looking at the man who had offered his help without asking for anything in return. There was something so simple about him, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Trust, maybe, or just the idea that someone cared enough to stop and ask. "All right," Clara said at last. "I could use help with the fence out back. It's been leaning for weeks now, and I haven't had the time to fix it." "Lead the way," Eli said with a nod, stepping aside to let Clara pass. Clara led him around the side of the house and toward the back of the farm. The fence was old, with several broken posts and sagging boards. The wind had knocked it down in places, and Clara had tried to prop it up with whatever she could find, but it wasn't enough. The fence needed real work, and it had been a reminder of everything that was broken in her life. Eli knelt beside the fence, inspecting the damage. "This'll be an easy fix," he said. "Just need to replace a few of these posts, and it'll hold up for another year or two." His movements were steady and practiced, each one deliberate. He worked with a quiet confidence, as though the task itself wasn't a problem to solve, but something he simply did. She admired that in him. "I don't get why you're helping me," Clara said suddenly. She hadn't meant to speak the words out loud, but they tumbled out before she could stop them. Eli didn't look up from his work, but paused for a moment. "No reason, really," he said, his voice calm. "I've been on my own a long time. I know what it feels like to need help and not ask for it. Thought I'd offer, is all." Clara swallowed hard. His words struck a chord in her. She had been alone for so long, and she had kept to herself, thinking she could handle everything on her own. But here was Eli, a stranger, offering help without hesitation. "I'm sorry for pushing you away," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to act like I didn't want help. I don't know how to accept it anymore." Eli paused, then stood up and looked at her. His expression was unreadable, but there was a softness in his eyes that Clara hadn't expected. "There's no need to apologize," he said. "Sometimes it's hard to let people in. I understand." Clara nodded, grateful for his understanding. It felt like a small weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe without the constant pressure of grief weighing on her. Eli finished fixing the fence and stood back to admire his work. "That should hold up for a while," he said. Anything else you need done today?" Clara looked around, taking in the sight of the farm. It was still a little overgrown, still a little broken, but something about it seemed more alive now. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt like maybe, just maybe, she could start making it her home again. "I think that's all for now," Clara said with a small smile. "Thank you, Eli." "You didn't have to do this." Eli tipped his hat, his expression serious but kind. "Like I said, ma'am, no trouble at all. I'm glad I could help." Clara watched him turn and walk back toward his horse, a feeling of warmth spreading through her chest. It was strange, but in that moment, she felt a little less alone. Eli hadn't just fixed the fence. He had fixed something inside of her, something she hadn't known was broken until it started to heal. As he rode off into the distance, Clara stood there for a long while, watching him go. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in months, she felt like she could face it. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the pain she had been holding on to, and with Eli's quiet presence, she felt a small spark of hope flicker to life inside her. Days passed, and Clara found herself looking forward to Eli's visits more than she cared to admit. He was always quiet, always calm, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. As the weeks went by, he returned to help her with various tasks around the farm, fixing the barn roof, mending fences, and even planting new crops in the soil that had once seemed so empty. His steady presence was like a balm to her wounded heart. She had started to notice the small things, the way Eli seemed to listen when she spoke, the way he never rushed her or made her feel like a burden. There was no judgment in his eyes, no pity in his voice. It was as if he simply accepted her for who she was, pain and all. One afternoon as the sun dipped low in the sky, Clara sat on the porch, her hands folded in her lap. She watched Eli working in the field, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his back bent as he carefully tended to the plants. She had always loved the land, even after everything had happened, and now, for the first time in a long time, she felt something stir within her. Hope. It was a fragile thing, but it was there, growing slowly with each passing day. Allie stopped for a moment, wiping the sweat from his brow, and looked over at Clara. "How's it feel?" he asked, his voice soft. Clara blinked, not sure what he meant at first. "The land," he said with a small smile. "How's it feel to see it coming back to life?" She looked out at the crops that had begun to sprout, green shoots rising from the earth like tiny promises. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. "It feels good," she said quietly. "It's like I'm starting over too." Starting over isn't easy, but sometimes it's the only way to move forward. Claire looked at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something unfamiliar. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." Ellie met her gaze, his expression gentle. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just doing what I can." Clara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her own words before speaking. "I haven't been able to let go of the past. I keep thinking that if I move on, if I let myself be happy again, it would mean that I didn't love them enough. But every day, it gets harder to keep holding on to that pain. I don't know what to do." Eli walked over to her, stopping just a few feet away. "You loved them more than anyone could ever understand," he said, his voice firm but kind. "But holding on to the past doesn't bring them back. It only keeps you from seeing the life that's still in front of you." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I'm so scared," she whispered. "I know," Eli said softly. "I'm scared too, but sometimes you have to take a step forward, even if you don't know what's waiting for you. You don't have to do it alone." Clara felt the weight of his words, and for the first time she felt something shift inside her. The ache in her chest didn't disappear, but it felt more bearable. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about learning to live with it and finding the courage to move forward, one step at a time. Eli looked at her for a long moment, as though weighing something in his mind. Finally, he spoke again. "I know it's not easy, but I'm here, Clara, and I'm not going anywhere." Her heart fluttered in her chest, but she didn't speak. She simply nodded, her eyes meeting his. It was a small step, but it felt like the first real step toward healing. The seasons changed, and with each passing day, Clara's world became a little brighter. The farm began to thrive again, the crops growing strong, the animals healthy. Clara's heart, once cold with grief, slowly started to thaw, and with that thawing came the realization that maybe, just maybe, there was room in her life for something new. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the land, Clara found herself walking toward the barn, her thoughts drifting. It had been months since Eli had first appeared at her doorstep, and in that time she had come to rely on his quiet strength. His presence had become a constant in her life, and she realized now that she had begun to look forward to his visits in a way she hadn't expected. As she neared the barn, she saw him standing outside, his back turned as he worked with the horses. Clara's heart fluttered in her chest, and she took a deep breath before approaching him. She wasn't sure what she was going to say, but she knew it was time to say something. Eli turned as he heard her footsteps, and a smile spread across his face. It was a small smile, but it was enough to make Clara's heart race. "Evening," he said, tipping his hat. "Evening," Clara replied, her voice a little softer than usual. She paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "Ellie, I've been thinking a lot about everything." Ellie raised an eyebrow, his gaze steady. "About what?"
"About us," Clara said, her voice faltering slightly.
"About how much I've come to rely on you, how much I've come to care for you." Eli stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "Clara, No," she interrupted softly, her eyes locking with his. "I need to say this. I've been so afraid for so long, afraid to let myself feel anything again, but you've shown me that it's okay to feel, to hope, to love, and I don't want to keep hiding from that anymore." Eli's eyes softened, and for the first time, Clara saw something different in him. A quiet, unspoken understanding. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently take hers. "Clara, I care for you too. I've seen the way you've healed, the way you've let the light back in, and I'm here with you for whatever comes next." Clara's breath caught in her throat as Eli leaned in slightly, his presence warm and comforting. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be pain, still be days when the past tried to pull her back into the shadows, but she also knew that she didn't have to walk it alone anymore. As Eli's hand gently brushed against hers, Clara felt the weight of her past begin to lift, just a little. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still room for love in her life. With a quiet sigh, she stepped closer to him, her heart full of something new, hope, healing, and the possibility of a future that was yet to be written.